You know, Freddy's moving to Texas in like a couple months, right?
Yeah, he's gonna fit right in.
Super American.
He's gonna fit right in to
Yeah.
somebody's boot.
All right, welcome back to the short of it. I'm Tyler Neville, sitting down with Dan David of Wolfpack Research and Freddie Brick of Muddy Waters. This week we are lacking Carson Block, unfortunately.
Well, I wouldn't say we're lacking him.
He's absent.
This is a special edition of The Short of It, brought to you by the shortest people on The Short of It.
Fuck you, Freddy. I'm taller than you are.
Freddie, how tall are you in real life?
He is at least 2 inches taller than Hervé Villachez.
If I knew who that was, I'd have a way to benchmark it.
I'm not saying Freddy's short, but every time he's at the airport, he looks up and yells, "The plane, the plane."
Yeah, let's get on into it. So we got a lot to talk about today. First story is Apple Daily. So the pro-democracy Hong Kong newspaper Apple Daily is closing this Saturday following police raids and the arrest of executives. It's a move that critics say undermines the city's status as a free and open society as Beijing essentially moves into Hong Kong. So what do you guys think of this?
As someone who lived in Hong Kong for around 3 years, I find it incredibly depressing. I left Hong Kong in about 2014, and I won't say that like there was any remote feel on the streets then of China encroaching. I think watching it from a distance, there have been a number of events that have taken place, and I hate to say it, like credit to China having been incredibly strategic and incremental in the way they have limited freedom in Hong Kong and slowly strangled the place, both in terms of free speech and, probably eventually as an economic center. And it used to be like a fantastic place to live, great place to do business, really wonderful vibe there. And I'm not sure looking at what's going on recently, I'm not sure I would actually even feel particularly safe being in Hong Kong anymore, doing what we do as activist short sellers, and especially working at a firm that is so publicly adverse to a lot of what the CCP has enacted. I'm curious if you kind of feel the same in terms of getting on the ground down in Hong Kong. I think the last time we were there is actually together back in maybe 16 or 17.
17. Yeah, first of all, it's not safe at all for us to be there. That the jury's out on that. And I'd like to just say for Jimmy Lai, who started Apple Daily 26 years ago, has lost his freedom. He's probably never going to get it back in a fight for democracy. We don't talk about it here. This is a freedom fighter like we've not seen in decades. We ought to be erecting statues for this guy, and we've just let it go. Now, I totally understand that Hong Kong is a part of China, and it always was. And China obviously lied, shocker, about when they were going to go from one country, two systems back to just one country. That's what they are now. Hong Kong's gone. It's just one country. But we could be at least verbalizing our support for the Hong Kongers and the pro-democracy people of Hong Kong. And if you're in Taiwan right now, what must you be thinking when you see the utter lack of support that the entire world is giving pro-democracy people of Hong Kong? I mean, if you just look at the Middle East, we go invade Iraq and topple a dictator and say to the Iraqis, here's democracy. And they're like, we just wanted a better dictator. Because you can't give people democracy. They have to fight for it. They have to bleed for it the same way we did. And Hong Kongers are willing to do this. And I get that we're not going to go fight a war over Hong Kong, but we could at least support them in any way we could. So it's a very sad day, and I wonder about the fate of Taiwan in the next 3 to 4 years. And I wonder about the fate of our investments in Hong Kong.
And it feels like the Western press hasn't even publicized this story that much,
No,
which is really
Uh,
fascinating. I haven't even seen it, in major news sources. And we briefly got during the Hong Kong protests, they covered that for about a month. And then since then, it's been, radio silence.
during COVID, as Freddie said, they took advantage of that situation where we're all distracted with whether we're going to lose our lives during a pandemic and this disease, and they've completely taken over Hong Kong and democracy and ended it, and that's where they are. And the last free speech newspaper is closed; it's over. Now, what I'm wondering is why they still have special status with our investments. We should no longer be treating Hong Kong with the special status and allowing almost $1 trillion of our pension funds and investments to flow through Hong Kong any longer.
What happens to the expat community that's there now? Like, are they just hightailing it out of there?
I think there's been probably at least from when I was there, there's been a writing on the wall feeling, I think, for a lot of expats. Look, early on, it was probably, hey, we can hire someone that's going to turn up, not drunk on Monday morning and doesn't view the Thursday lunch break as the kind of bookend to the next weekend. So actually, if we hire someone local, we might boost productivity. I think certainly for when I was there, like the junior ranks of employees at investment banks, there was an increasing focus on China, an increasing focus on people who had relationships in China and could pull in business. And then on top of that, you had what they kind of referred to as like the sea turtles. So young Chinese who'd been educated abroad in most of the best institutions in the West, returning to China. And I think they naturally had far greater ties and relationships and were able to bring in business. So I think there was like a very logical point where many expats said, well, actually, the packages are getting smaller. My expertise are not so in demand. And PS, as banks were restructured in the West, like salaries, they really didn't need to pay up for people to kind of move out to Asia anyway. So there was that factor. And then on top of that, yeah, if you're sitting there as someone reasonably senior in anything that could be viewed as remotely controversial, either in terms of commerce or free speech, you know, there's really not a long list of reasons to stick around. And I think a lot of people, as Chinese contract law comes into place in Hong Kong, and people question the rule of law in the courts there, have got to be wondering like why they're better off being sat in Hong Kong versus actually just sat on the mainland anyway if they're going to do business. So if you do continue to want to do business in China, that kind of arbitrage, like safe harbor almost that Hong Kong had, really isn't the case anymore. You may as well be actually inside China. Alternatively, if you don't want to live in China and you don't want the protections that courts in the West offer you, you may as well go back to the US or the UK or wherever else it is and run your business from a distance.
Well, Singapore,
There's Singapore, which, if we're talking about dictatorships,
Taiwan for a time.
yeah, that's a really well run, benevolent dictatorship.
Let's not pretend like we don't do business with dictatorships. Like that's, I mean, we do.
And
So
look, if you want to contrast Singapore and Hong Kong, I mean, I will credit Singapore. I briefly looked at doing some sort of like startup type thing in Hong Kong, and there really weren't great avenues for funding, free space for startups. Like Hong Kong had made a very slow move forward in terms of approaching tech, and Singapore, to its credit, has been extremely forward thinking in terms of making itself both the Switzerland of Asia and also a hub for tech companies and actually reap the rewards. So, there have been some good things that dictatorship has done.
So to pivot a little bit and go off the legislation point you made, China passed a new law where the legislative body said they're backing sweeping retaliation against any individuals, their families, and organizations responsible for enforcing foreign sanctions. So that came 2 days after the U.S. Senate passed the landmark Innovation and Competition Act, which
Yeah.
identified China as a key rival to U.S. technological dominance. What are your thoughts on this, Dan?
You've got to love China. The simplicity of how they move. We labor over every word on in every company that we would attach sanctions to, and make sure that they're a part of, a genocide happening in Xinjiang, or oppressing Muslim Uyghurs, and we'll sanction those companies as we should. And China's like, no, you're going to sanction these companies? New law. It's called the Anti-Sanction Us law. Go yourself. And as a part of this new law, we can take your property. And we're not just talking about government officials. We're talking about people who work at these companies. We can take your bank accounts. We can take your company. We can take your land, arbitrarily do anything we want. And it's really like no big deal. Our government's just like, well, back to square one. What do we do? Let's go talk about this for another 6 months. And when we do, and we come up with some watered down version of how we respond to it, China will take another 2 days and come out with some, anti whatever we did. And they're just fast moving. They're just better than us at this. And we don't have the political will to really stand up to this. I don't know where we're going to be, 10 or 15 years from now, maybe less. Some days I feel like we're going to have something like COVID, or, some kind of event that's going to pull our political differences together, and we can point our ships in one direction and fight together the way China seems to as a government anyway. And then most days I feel like we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. I mean, it's just a slow moving, sinking ship.
It does seem a little bit bipartisan at this point. Like Biden's not being a total pushover, but maybe, that hasn't really been publicized as much. Do you think he's just going to lay down?
Look, I don't know. I mean, what has anybody said about the anti-sanctions law and the fact that any one of our citizens just working for a company that enforces the sanctions that we are asking them to enforce can be seized? What are we doing about that? I would call that laying down. And I don't know that anybody before Biden's done much better, really. I mean, Trump had a great rhetoric, and I think he kept China on their toes by, saying, hey, that was a fantastic meeting. And by the time China gets home, they tell him it was a terrible meeting and start over again. I think that drove China crazy a bit, and I didn't mind it. But I don't know that any president since Clinton has handled China well. So I'm not going to go hard on Biden here, but I don't think we're handling it well at all. I mean, we need political will. And if we're counting on Germany and Europe to come in and have our backs, good luck. That's not happening. They're absolutely going to look at 1.4 billion consumers and continue to count the euros, or in the past, Deutschmarks, whatever.
Hey, what about the pound?
Well, I mean, England seems to be, a little bit tougher, but, you get France and Germany, and they just don't, they are not going to have that political will in the Eurozone behind us where it comes to standing tough on China. It's not there. You've heard about, the leading candidate for prime minister in Germany is just like, hey, having this adversarial relationship with China, even on an economic basis, whether they have their issues with Xinjiang or not, is not good for us. And he's totally backing off of it.
Unfortunately, they're taking a pretty pragmatic view. They sell a lot of products. They look at it as a very big market. I mean, I think the UK has actually taken a similar view with respect to the City of London. There was certainly a point at which they were trying to make it an RMB offshore trading hub. the UK has generally been pretty open to dictators and kleptocrats coming to the UK to wash the money and purchase assets and clean things up. So I'm not sure China is going to be any different, despite the alarm over the idea of them building out our 5G network, which also you don't hear as much about anymore.
Well, they're not building out our 5G network. I mean, who's our? You're talking about the UK?
Yeah, I'm from the UK, Dan. Don't you forget that. Don't you
Uh,
forget that.
I thought for sure I saw a U.S. passport at one point or another, but like, good luck to you. I mean,
Just the green card. Thank you.
Godspeed and God save the Queen, I guess. I mean, if you're going to let Huawei build out your 5G structure, then I mean, that's a bad draw, pal.
That is.
You know, Freddy's moving to Texas in like a couple months, right?
Yeah, he's going to fit right in.
Super American.
He's gonna fit right in to somebody's boot.
I actually heard this awesome saying. I was discussing gun ownership and the love of guns down in Texas, and I asked a friend of mine. I was like, "So, am I gonna see people like walking down Congress with like long arms?" He's like, "Yeah, you get it from time to time. They're usually these like big dudes wearing camo." He goes, "We refer to them as the gravy seals." So that's
That's gonna be
I
you.
enjoy that. Yeah,
I'm not a big gun fan. I mean, you get your life threatened enough where you get proficient with one because you have to be. But look, I mean, I do get it on some level. I mean, there was that terrorist attack in Texas, what, 4 or 5 years ago, and these guys go into some civic center and they're going to start shooting the place up, and they get their ass blown away because it turns out everybody there has a gun. So I'm thinking they're going to go, I don't know, Oregon, probably not Texas.
probably
That's
not.
I'd say that's pretty spot on. Being here for 2 years now. But all right, let's go on to our favorite SPAC, the electric truck maker Lordstown Motors, where executives got caught dumping stock before their poor earnings.
Well,
Five,
that
ex-
was just the latest thing they got caught doing.
yeah, sorry. So one of the executives, John Vo, who oversaw the propulsion unit, sold almost 99.3% of his equity. What do you guys think of this?
As one does.
I gotta wonder to myself because like people generally like round numbers. Like, why was he leaving the 0.7%? Like, what was that like a toehold? Like, hey, the headline will just read, sold most of his equity, not sold all of his equity.
Well, you always have to tip the dealer. Just
He left like 700 shares or something. It was so ridiculous.
The work Dan Taylor has been doing on
yeah,
insider
great work.
sales and look, the conversation I had with him the other week really opened my eyes up to how many ways there are to abuse the system. Another area that was picked up on and I don't think gets enough focus and is actually a much more gray area than I was aware of is the issue of blackouts. So, that is when companies who are close to sensitive periods, such as earnings, won't talk to investors. Some stuff I read, I think it was Matt Levine this week, actually opened my eyes up. I mean, a blackout period, as conventional it is not a legal requirement, I don't believe. Violating company policy is not illegal if you sell stock during a time when there is a blackout. It's certainly frowned upon. It might not do much for your conversation with your internal compliance people, but as far as I'm aware, it's not illegal. And I think about 95, 98% of companies do have stated blackout policies that they try and enforce, but really gets you thinking. I mean, what are this like 2 to 5% of companies who don't have a blackout policy? Like, what are the insiders doing? And then, how are conversations with those companies going around earnings with investors? So it really does leave you wondering because yeah, there are certain people who seem to have made like a 20-year hedge fund career out of being able to guess quarters. So that's an interesting open question as to how you can always be right about things like that with blackout periods in place.
Well, I mean, you're talking about these stock purchase plans. I mean, they're ridiculous. These Form 144s are not even digitally filed, right? They're just like there's as as Dan Taylor kind of says, you see that movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the Ark goes into this warehouse that is just endless, and that's where these forms go. So who's watching what's happening with these compensation plans? And then you find that, like, if this executive knows that this quarter is going to be a blowout quarter, just cancel the plan. You're not selling stock this quarter. Start a new plan the next quarter. This kind of shit is just ridiculous. And talk about smash and grab. Come on. You want to talk about something that needs to stop? How about we put a stop to that kind of corporate malfeasance that continues to go on and on and on? That is Lordstown Motor is not doing anything that a lot of companies are doing right now. They just happen to be in the spotlight. They just happen to 10 other things up prior to this. So that became an issue.
So does Gensler have the power, or will he have the willpower to actually pursue stuff like this? We've seen him in the headlines a lot more lately. What are your thoughts on the SEC, the new SEC?
I think he says he will, and I'm going to take him at his word. I mean, I don't know where he's going to come down on a whole matter of things. I know that corporations have the biggest lobby, so that's going to be tough. And a lot of people, former SEC enforcement people that work at the commission, work at these corporations. So it tends to get watered down from one way or another. I wish Gensler all the success in the world at making it a cleaner, fairer market on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I certainly hope he's able to, put a framework around this that actually makes executives far more accountable for their actions in terms of stock sales. My fear is there are very smart people who are highly motivated and incentivized to find the next loophole. I mean, God knows it has become near impossible to work out what executives are paid. The complexity within compensation plans is mind blowing. I will sometimes spend several hours looking through the compensation plans of executives, and to be honest, not even necessarily come away with a feeling that I understand it inside and out, whether it's RSUs, options triggered based on certain targets being hit, of which some are sold, some are not, cashless exercise of options, stock pledges. You combine that all, and it's truly difficult to work out what executives really get paid and what they're actually cashing out versus just what is on paper. So my hope is that he can close some loopholes that seem certainly unfair and prejudicial to investors. And I'm really hoping that we can at least be ahead of the next loopholes that the guys on the other side are going to try and exploit.
And I think we should point out it's a particularly hard thing because nobody cares. I mean, I pointed out companies before that the executives have cashed in 3 times as much value in stock as the company they've taken public has done in revenue in the 3 years that they've been public. Nobody cares. That's not even a short thesis. So the political will for this, I don't know. I know that the investor community doesn't care when it comes to that being an issue.
Is that just because the active investors have basically been hollowed out? Like, there's no one really that wants to take a stand. Activism is slim to none.
I think some of the look, it is truly difficult, if we're being fair to companies, it is truly difficult to create plans that incentivize people in the appropriate manner. Like, if you're too busy incentivizing short-term behavior, might be harder to attract certain talent. If you're too busy saying like, "Hey, you got to be locked in for like 15 years," well, the reality is like no one in this phone call has like the entire bulk of their compensation locked into like a 15-year target. So that doesn't seem particularly fair either. So I think it's actually very hard to strike a balance. Um, there are clear distortions in US pay when you compare them to pay structures in, say, Europe or the UK. There have been many attempts, I think, in Europe to tie pay to some sort of performance, and you have a number of examples where executives have, over 10 years built up significant value for companies to be awarded pay packages that are much more commensurate with US listed executives. And there's been outrage over the $30 million LTIP that, senior executive has taken because there was a structure tied to a very long term incentive, which they hit it out the park. So I think some of the problems and the complexities have been caused by reactions to trying to solve a fairly difficult complex. Then when you overlay the absolute runaway greed and the fact that people then try and game those systems, I think you end up with where we are today, where you have a very heads I win, tails I lose, but losing's not really so bad because I'm still going to go and find another really high paid job and structure a job with, structure a package with a tremendous amount of upside if I win, and I still make an okay living if I lose.
How do the employees, like, this is what's so fascinating to me is like at Lordstown Motors, the employees that are left there and the CEO and executives all dump their stock. How, are they just sitting ducks there at that point? Like, why are they even there? Why don't all quit? Is it just that they need, a job?
Well, I worked for a public company for almost 15 years, and I can tell you that the employees there are very plugged in to this issue. The reason they're still there is because, yeah, they need a job. I mean, that's why employees are still at their jobs. But I can assure you, they're pissed. They are not happy that this money's going out the door and that their company's about to go under because of money and mismanagement. So, yeah, they're none too happy. And I think that if this thing gets sorted in some way, that there probably will be and should be management change, and the employees will insist on it, or they're not going to be happy with their current environment there, and nor should they be.
And let's move on to the last story of the day, DraftKings. So Hindenburg published a report called DraftKings, a $21 billion SPAC betting it can hide its black market operations. The report cited concerns over a merger with SB Tech, a Bulgaria-based gaming tech company that allegedly deals in black market gaming, money laundering, and organized crime, just like our favorite short-selling activist companies. So where do you guys stand on DraftKings?
I read the report. I think, as usual, as I've said before on this program, I think that Hindenburg does a really good job of writing a report. I think it's a problem. I go back to like when this report came out. It was pretty interesting because, immediately I had people pinging me. What do you think of the DraftKings report? This Hindenburg bozo. And I'm like, number one, I don't think the guy's a bozo. And I think you should read the report. And, I'm automatically getting from this is a retail guy. No, I'm buying it on the dip. No, okay. And he ends up being right, so he makes money. But the issue here, you can be right about DraftKings right now. But we're talking about organized crime in an online gambling company, if these accusations are true. This is a big problem. And it's like Lordstown Motors, right? Like this wasn't a problem until it was a problem, and these contracts aren't real. If this ends up being investigated and being a real problem, it's a problem for the industry. It's a big problem for DraftKings. So I think it's a pretty big risk right now holding on to this. I don't know what puts them under, but the headline risk is pretty severe for an online gambling company to be involved with organized crime, because it was really the worst fears of having these companies available to the average investors online, right? That their organized crime would be a part of it. So you wonder, you can't actually believe that regulators aren't looking at this at all. I have to believe that they are. And while those wheels grind slowly, if there's truth to this, this is not gonna vet well for DraftKings at all.
Yeah, for me, once again, I'm just left thinking, what DD was done on this deal? It's a
Right.
really nice piece. There's a great cast of characters involved. You didn't have to go that deep, and I don't mean that to take away from the research. I'm just saying you didn't have to go that deep to look at the characters involved being questionable. So, was it that people in the room just said, "Look, we like the thesis. This is interesting. Harry wants to buy this. Let's not find any reasons to say no"? Was it the Kroll report, or whoever they got to run some sort of like cursory diligence, like just didn't find these names in a database? That's what I'm left thinking. Like, what level of DD was done here? Which I think is just a recurring theme with SPACs. And the irony is this is one of the most successful SPACs. I mean, Harry Sloan, who also took Skills public, which Dan, you
Wonderful company.
yeah, and again a company where we think there's not a significant amount of substance behind the hype. What DD was done on this? I'm left with the conclusion that like very little, because I really do think in a business that's trying to present itself as clean and has signed all these partnerships with the NFL and other organizations that take their image very seriously, you really wonder how tying those kind of characters in with that kind of business is going to play out. Now, the flip side I would say is there have been payments companies, and there have certainly been online gambling companies that have had a significant amount of gray business, as they like to call it. And either it's business that people know is being operated in countries that have banned online gambling and it's done through VPNs, or you have these businesses that are operating in like questionable sectors, either processing kind of high risk merchant payments, i.e., porn and gambling. And sometimes those businesses, if they have an end market that's growing fast enough, have been able to muddle through. Now, obviously, DraftKings trades at a valuation that is reflective of its large TAM. And I think a number of people have pointed out that you need to do some pretty aggressive backflips to get there in terms of the current valuation being underwritten. But yeah, I think in my experience, I have seen some of these businesses that operate large gray or illegal businesses be able to kind of continue to churn along for longer than the shorts have had patience for.
Well, I mean, you look at Solutions 30, and I don't know if that thing fell apart right away. When you talk about doing due diligence on the background of people there, I mean, and then you guys really went after it and got it good.
And that's an unfair comparison, okay? Like, despite being European, they're some of the laziest investors on the planet. If you are
Okay.
trying to compare the intelligence of US retail investors to certain long-only fund managers that own those stocks, that is just not a fair comparison to make, and that is really harsh on U.S. retail investors, some of which know what time the market opens up and actually pay attention to things in their portfolio. So,
Well,
I
actually, I was drawing the conclusion
it's
about due diligence and how due diligence costs money for these SPAC sponsors. Not doing it really doesn't. They make money in the end when you find out that there's organized crime, whether it be with Solutions 30 or DraftKings. They'll all have made money in the end, and retail gets stuck with it. So yeah, I think this kind of could end the same way. It could. But my favorite part of DraftKings, I do have to say, is I immediately went and looked at, because a Penn Gaming, right? So you got to go look at Davey Day Trader, and he had his day trading thing going on, and he's like, "Oh, DraftKings down today. Why is it down today? I'm gonna go find out on my own." And he does this little gimmick where he finds out on his own why it's down, and he starts reading the bullet points of the Hindenburg report live. He's like, organized crime. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. I just bought 500,000 shares.
Is DraftKings down 10%? What? Hindenburg Research? DraftKings, a $21 billion SPAC betting it can hide its black market operations? The hell does that mean? Hindenburg went after DraftKings? Holy cow. Whoa. 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 That's some shit. I think DraftKings will come back. I'd buy it. I mean, there's too many big names involved in DraftKings for it to be like shut out by that, but that is nuts.
And he made money. You got to love the guy. You got to love him, man. He's just like, I don't care. I don't care. I bought I bought $500,000 worth, and it went up $3. Guy probably made 30, 40 grand.
Is that all just because the street has been so hollowed out, where there's pricing pressure on fund managers from the fees they can charge? Passive is taking a big chunk of everything, so the due diligence, like, you can't afford it. So it's almost like this Tiger, how Tiger Global's doing it on the venture capital side, where they're just throwing money at every deal, like left and right. It's like handing money over to like sociopathic, private company CEOs. I feel like that's like the end result of all this stuff.
You're fighting the tape on a daily basis when you're putting out critical research. I mean, especially if there's institutional ownership, high insider ownership, if it's a meme stock. I mean, it can be a suicide mission. It's, like Stanley Druckenmiller said. I mean, like, somebody was asking me about MBIS the other day. Like, we shorted it and made money from, $3.50 down to $1.75. It's at $22 today. For nothing in that story has changed, by the way. But am I short it today? No. Why? Because I don't feel like putting out a dumpster fire with my face. I mean, like, what are you going to do at this point? Will I short it at $12? Yeah, it's still not worth $1.75. So why fight it at $22? I mean, catch it on the way down, or maybe they hit a flyer and somebody thinks their LiDAR is worth something once they start actually testing it. I don't know.
I mean, the other issue with you putting a dumpster fire out with your face is, like, you are kind of little, so could you get up over the sides if you wanted to?
No, I just kind of crawl up there, and it really catches.
Do it together.
It's the nose hairs more than anything else.
We could take turns. Like, you could give me a little leg up, and I could have a go, and vice versa.
Yeah, that'd be a great Zeros episode.
Well, we'll do that one next week. So, guys, this was a pleasure. We'll have Carson.
I know it was.
We'll have Carson back next month to bust his balls, but we will catch you next month.